Hi, my name is Paul and I like to go places. Well, I'm coming up to almost 3 years of owning my Jeep TJ, and this is actually the first off-road trip I've done in a couple months, mainly because I seriously broke the Jeep back in January, and then I had another strange issue that was coolant related that has been baffling me for a while, and I've just fixed that. And now the vehicle is in a position where I'm actually able to off-road it without me thinking it's going to explode or something. So with that in mind, the title of this video is, Do I Regret Buying My Jeep TJ? The quick answer is no. This vehicle has allowed me to do exactly what I was hoping it would, and that would be haul my ass into the middle of nowhere where nobody else is around, be able to conquer any sort of obstacles I can throw at it, you know, far beyond my own skill level with off-roading, because I'm still pretty new to this, but also have the necessary equipment to get myself out of any problems. And yeah, it has done that. Now, there's other vehicles that probably would have been a better choice for some of the things I want to do, like the cargo space in the Jeep is not ideal. And if I'm doing a fully loaded camping trip, the back of it is entirely full. Like, I can't see out the back window just because there's so much crap in there. So for hauling camping equipment, the TJ is really not an ideal choice. However, it is the size of vehicle I did want. So I sort of knew that I was going to have some things that I give up on, like the ability to store a lot of cargo. I mean, to be honest though, something like a built-out Toyota 4Runner or something like that probably would give me the same result that I'm looking for, but the Jeep, being a smaller vehicle, does let me get into some of these smaller trails, and that's really one of the most important things that I needed to consider. So I have to sacrifice the cargo space, but I do have a vehicle that does a great job off-road. Now, when it comes to being a daily driver as well, there are some things that, you know, I don't really enjoy about it. But luckily for me, daily driving is basically going 10 minutes to the grocery store. I don't have to sit in, you know, a huge line of stop and go traffic and have huge commutes and stuff like that. So the Jeep is okay. Now, there are some things we'll probably touch on later, like the 6-speed transmission that's in this thing. The synchros, they were gone a long time ago. So I have to shift in a very particular way, which I'm used to, but it's annoying in traffic, extremely annoying. So yeah, but for me, the TJ, I think, has been the ideal vehicle. But let's jump into it with more specifics. I think first I'll talk about what problems I had with the Jeep in the last couple months. Right now I'm at a camping area which I tried to reach in January, and I broke an axle. And I had to limp the Jeep all the way to the nearest highway where I could finally get cell signal and have tools brought to me to deal with it. That was not pleasant, and yeah, let's talk about that. So basically, the passenger side axle here on the front, this essentially broke right kind of at the U-joint, and I'm fairly certain it was my own fault. I was in some real bad quality snow, and I had the lockers engaged, and I was trying a maneuver that I think put a little too much stress, like right on that particular side, and it essentially just disintegrated right at the weakest point. So yeah, and after I got back out of where I was, because I was kind of stuck and I actually had to winch my way out of the snow, and I felt the Jeep, the front end of it was just weird. Something was wrong, and I look under there, and yeah, it had just basically sheared apart in those between those two axle pieces. So now the problem was I'm like more than 10 kilometers out in the middle of nowhere, and I had to limp the Jeep back to the nearest highway. And yeah, with that combination of axles being sheared apart, I was going maybe like 5 kilometers an hour, and the front end was just taking a huge beating because it kept getting bound up, and like it was bad. Now, unfortunately, I had to do this because I was in an area where I had no cell phone reception, so I couldn't call for help, and I did not have the necessary tools to actually remove the axle where I was. And yeah, so I basically had to limp the Jeep, knowing that it was probably going to cause some further issues with the front end. We'll touch base on that in a minute here, but yeah, so I managed to get myself to a gas station on the highway. I had some tools brought out to me. I didn't have the necessary tools as well that I could have brought to me that would actually let me remove the axle on the side of the road. Because the axles were essentially destroyed, I just opted to slice right through them with a saw, cut out the crap that was binding, and then I could drive again, no problem. So yeah, that was unpleasant. However, I do blame myself for that. I think they broke because of just the maneuver I was trying to pull at the time. So that was $500 for the new parts. And I went with kind of like off-brand Yukon gear axles or something like that. And yeah, got them in there. That did take a while. I had to wait for parts to come in and all that stuff. So I couldn't do any off-roading at the time. And after I got that fixed, another ongoing problem that just started happening around the same time, or actually, this one's tough to explain because for a while, my Jeep has sounded like it's got some sort of exhaust leak, which, you know, I've been trying to look at since last year. However, the sound has kind of changed recently in that it no longer sounded like an exhaust leak. It sounded more like a ch-ch-ch-ch-ch, and I couldn't figure out what in the hell that was. And then I started finding coolant in random parts of my engine bay. So one day I was coming out of the grocery store and I'd see coolant on my front diff cover, and I'd be like, well, how did that get there? I'd look underneath and I would then see coolant puddled up on the lower rad hose, but it wasn't like coming from anywhere around there. It was just on the hose, not where the clamp is, but more the middle of the hose. So I thought, what the hell? Okay, is my hose leaking? So, you know, I ordered new rad hoses from Rock Auto, and I figured, okay, I got to do hoses. And, you know, I was looking through the radiator. There was nothing wrong with the radiator. And, you know, I'm thinking somewhere there's a leak, because I would also find coolant dripping down the front of the engine block. And, you know, I would just find coolant on suspension pieces and everything like that. And I was like, what is going on? So most of my coolant system is new within the last couple of years. The radiator was the most recent thing I replaced. And I looked around on the radiator. There was no leaks. There was no damp area on the radiator itself. So, you know, I was starting to lose my mind. And then I was just kind of on a whim tightening up every single clamp in the engine bay, hoping that maybe that was somehow related. And then I found what it was. All right, so inside my engine bay, the problem was this pipe here, this angled metal pipe, which sits right kind of like in here, and it attaches to the top of the water pump. And what happened is, so this is actually a brand new pipe, and you see it comes with the thread sealer on there. So when I replaced the water pump, I did replace that pipe at the same time, and I torqued it down. It was perfectly tight, and it was all in there, and that was like 3 years ago when I bought the Jeep. And unfortunately what happened is that pipe became loose enough that pressure, I think, was escaping out of the threads on the water pump, which is down there, and it would spray up and land on the drive belt right next to it, and then it would fling the coolant around the engine bay, which is how it ended up way, way down there on my lower rad hose, and also how it ended up dripping down the front of the engine. Now, because, you know, the engine is hot when it's running, any of the coolant that was still like up here would actually kind of like burn off, I guess, because whenever I looked under the hood, it seemed dry up here. I never saw like a leak that seemed obvious up here, so I didn't suspect it. It was when I was tightening up hoses that I touched this and it wiggled back and forth. And I realized, well, that's what happened. Now, the great engine design means that you can't tighten that pipe because it sits in like this, and to tighten it, it would just immediately bang into the valve cover because it would have to do this entire loop around. So the only way to tighten that pipe when it was in there would be to remove the whole water pump with it attached and then swing it around another, I guess, 1 or 2 times or whatever, reseal the threads, do all of that. And I did order that pipe on Rock Auto because I realized that was the problem. So I ordered the pipe immediately thinking I was going to have to do all of this crap. And then it dawned on me that I could not do that. And what I could do is replace that pipe with a hose and then add a coupler up here to the heater hose that then continues onto my heater core. And that seemed like a much better idea than dealing with this stupid ass pipe. So what I did is I actually cut the pipe right in half. That would allow me to actually spin it out of the water pump without having to then remove like my thermostat and all of this stuff that's also in the way. And I put in, it's a 3/8 NPT thread, I think, that goes into the water pump. And then it had a 5/8 barbed end on it, which just a little adapter that I screwed into the water pump there. And then I just took another piece of old heater hose that I had and I cut it to size, clamped it on there, put that coupler there, and this has immediately solved that problem. And then one of my strange noises went away at the same time, which made me think that that ch-ch-ch sound was possibly the sound of pressure escaping my cooling system from this wobbling around and the threads no longer sealing, because the engine got mysteriously quieter after I did this. So I figured, oh, okay, you know, I still have what sounds like an exhaust leak, though. We'll talk about that later, because I think it's the bad gasket. Like, I used a Felpro gasket when I had the manifolds off at one point before, and that doesn't use multi-layered steel on the exhaust part. And what I potentially think has happened is I blew apart part of the gasket. Maybe. I don't know. I'm kind of getting tired of working on Jeeps, so I'm just kind of ignoring that for the time being. I'm just going to say, nope, that doesn't exist. Yeah. So you might be thinking, Paul, why are you rambling on about your Jeep repairs? Well, that's part of my whole thing about if I regret owning a Jeep TJ or not. I am probably the perfect person to own one of these vehicles because I'm not technically a mechanic, but I can fix things, sometimes not the right way. However, I can fix things in a way where it typically works after. So a vehicle like this, especially one where I off-road it, it takes a beating, I have modified it, things break. So a Jeep TJ, or older Jeeps in general, I think need to be owned by people who are either mechanically skilled or are rich. Now, I'm not rich, which is why I own an old Jeep. However, I don't have to pay labor for any of the repairs that I do because I do all of that work myself. I don't have a great working area. I basically just have to do my repairs on a driveway, but I've had no issue with doing any of the maintenance or the upgrades or the repairs, all of that on my own. I have all the necessary tools, pretty much, to do that sort of stuff. And I do also carry a whole bunch of tools with me in the Jeep in case I need to do field repairs. And that now includes the tools I need to remove axles in case I break another one, but let's not go there. So yeah, I don't regret driving a vehicle that requires me to do all of these repairs, as long as it lets me get out here to places like this and enjoy my life. So yeah, if you're looking for an older Jeep like a TJ and you don't have the skill to repair it and you're not rich, you probably do not want to do any modification to it whatsoever and only drive it on pavement. Because if you do that, fewer things will probably break. Now, in the time that I've owned this Jeep, I've probably done the equivalent of a couple $1,000s worth of labor for the work I've done to it. Like, I installed the lift kit myself. You know, I just used a cheap one because I just wanted to see kind of what the Jeep would be like. And sometime down the line, you know, I might invest more into it, but all the upgrades I did myself. Then we had the big repairs, like the heater core was leaking. That's a full dash out job. To have a mechanic do that would just be devastating to your bank account. So when you're driving an older vehicle like that, the only way you can afford to do that really is if you're doing the work yourself. So stuff like that, when I did the maintenance, replacing a bunch of stuff under the hood, you know, all of that stuff I did myself. And that's the only way a vehicle like this can be affordable, especially since the gas mileage is so terrible. So driving it anywhere also costs you a lot of money. So let's talk about another aspect that you might need to consider with an older vehicle like this. Now, when I say older vehicle, I mean this is a 2006, and this is the newest vehicle I've ever owned in my life. That might be kind of sad, but I don't do new vehicles. I think that the kind of technology they've been throwing at new vehicles is making the vehicles worse and making people dumber. You know, like tire pressure sensors. Really? Do your eyeballs not work? Can you not see your tires flat? Oh, you need a computer to tell you? Check on it yourself. Are you serious? And I mean, that's just one of my potential rants I can make about new vehicles. But when you get to older vehicles, you need to be concerned about availability of parts. And let's talk specifically about one that I found extremely annoying, and that was when I had to rebuild the front drive shaft. I had an issue where I just started hearing a weird noise from underneath the vehicle, like some sort of bizarre squeaking. And I wasn't sure what it was, and then, you know, I disconnected the front drive shaft to rule that out, and unfortunately that basically told me everything I needed to know. So I had to replace all the components in the front drive shaft. Now, the U-joints were easy enough to order, just get them on Rock Auto. The centering yoke thing, that was not listed in the available parts on Rock Auto for this model of Jeep, for some strange reason. So, okay, I figured, whatever, I'll order it from another Jeep-related parts website. You know, I placed the order, I don't really hear anything, and then it's like, oh, we're back ordered like 1 or 2 months. And I'm like, well, that doesn't really work for me. I want my 4-wheel drive. So after doing a bunch of research, and there's like a loud plane behind me in case you're wondering what that noise is. But yeah, I did some research and I made a guess as to which of the part numbers I needed for that centering yoke. And then I kind of found a alternative way to order it, which meant going into like the 1970s Ford Bronco parts area on Rock Auto, and it for some reason listed the exact part that I needed, even though it's not listed for a Jeep or something like that. I can't remember exactly how I found it, but it was some bizarre thing like that. So I was able to finally order that part, although it took a lot of frustration to get that. And I mean, that's just a part I could still order. There's plenty of other things on the Jeep that you just can't really order anymore, and you have to resort to going to junkyards and stuff like that. So if you're trying to rebuild a vehicle like this old, or if you've got certain things that break under the hood, just be aware that you may not be able to get the stuff you need in a timely manner. So one of the things that I do, and is probably something I would recommend any Jeep owner do, is have a second vehicle. I do also own a Honda CRX, which I keep specifically for if this thing goes terribly wrong and I can't fix it within a couple days and I need a vehicle to then drive around. So I don't know, maybe that's just like some of my automotive privilege speaking, but yeah, I do have my Honda CRX, and it and my Jeep are both small enough to fit on my driveway. That works out great for me, and I never have to worry too much about if I accidentally break this thing really badly, because I can fix it, but it takes time, and I won't be out of a vehicle during that time. So, yeah. So with the abuse that this thing takes, you might be wondering, has this Jeep ever actually left me stranded somewhere? The answer is yes. However, it is probably the best case scenario in this particular instance. I was not off-road anywhere. I was not even that far from my house. I was in the parking lot of a hardware store about 10 minutes from my house, and my fuel pump died. That was the only time that I actually had to tow the Jeep back to my house, because it would have been unreasonable to expect me to have been able to fix that in the parking lot, mainly because, one, in order to do a fuel pump on a Jeep, you have to drop the tank, and two, I didn't have a fuel pump, and I was not willing to get one of those cheap-ass parts store ones either. So when I replaced the fuel pump in this vehicle, I went with the OEM Bosch pump, which is, if you go on Rock Auto, you know which one it is because it's the most expensive one. Yep. And that still took a few days to arrive. And during that time, of course, the Jeep was down. I couldn't do anything with it. So that was the one instance where this thing did unfortunately leave me stranded. And that's one of the few things that could happen to a Jeep like this that would actually, have that happen to you. There's really not much else that I think can go that wrong. The electrical system in these vehicles, I think, is pretty basic. So unless you have some other strange issue that happens under the hood, like your computer fries, there's really not much else that could actually stop you from actually driving, I don't think. Now, one of those things, though, is, I can't remember what it's called. It's some sort of device that's in the engine, and it's connected to your oil pump drive. And I did replace that because that is a known failure point on this generation of Jeep, this year particular, I think. So there was a replacement from Crown Automotive that I put in there pretty much as soon as I bought the Jeep, because I wasn't sure if the previous owner had ever done that. And there's that plane somewhere up there that's kind of like making all that noise. So yeah, there are particular things that can go wrong in these vehicles. So if you do those and take care of things like that, generally speaking, I think you should be fine. So even when I broke that front axle, I could still make this thing move and make it back to an area where I could then get help. And I still drove it from that point back to my house, which was an hour and a half away, by cutting apart the pieces of the front axle. And I basically just strapped them in, and I also disconnected the front drive shaft so that there was really no chance that that broken side would actually be rotating at all. But yeah, I drove home on the highway like that. So it's, as long as you're creative about it, you can make this thing get back to your house unless very specific things go wrong, such as the fuel pump, and then you're screwed. So I've probably been rambling for a while here. I'm not even sure how long this video is going to end up being, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to talk about the Jeep because I think the most popular video on my channel, I think, seems to be when I was talking about using my Jeep as a daily driver. So I wanted this video to kind of be an update to that video where I talk about how I still use this primarily as my off-road rig, but I do also drive it almost every single day for, you know, going around town, doing my city driving. One thing I think I was going to talk about is the transmission. Now, I might have been happier if I had a slightly older year with maybe the AX15 5-speed transmission. I do really like the 6-speed that's in here, the NSG 370, I believe it is. The problem is the synchros on mine have checked out. I don't know how to rebuild a transmission, nor am I going to learn. So for the time being, I'm basically living with it until the point where maybe I can find a replacement with lower miles and in better shape. But I have to drive this in a very particular way, which means I have to wait until around 3,000 revs to do my shifting. And then even when I shift, I have to feel the gear lever as it moves between the gears. Otherwise, there's potential for grinding the gears. And then there's other quirks, like going from 4 to 5. I got a double clutch. Doesn't matter how I'm shifting, it always seems to grind unless I double clutch. So that's pretty annoying at times, but I can live with it because I don't have to do a whole lot of stop and go traffic where I'm constantly shifting. So while that is super annoying to do when I'm driving around town using it as my daily driver, I can live with it because the benefit of this as an off-road vehicle outweighs the annoyances of it being a daily driver. And other things to keep in mind, I guess, as well, if you're doing a lot of daily driving, every modification that you do to your Jeep to make it better off-road will probably make it worse for everything else you do. So I have these larger wide tires on here, which I love. You know, they're cheap tires, but I think they're still pretty decent. They are annoying on the highway when I'm driving in the lane where semi-trucks drive the most, and the road is not flat. You've got like these kind of divots in the road, and the Jeep likes to kind of get stuck in that section and kind of move back and forth because this thing isn't as wide as a semi-truck. So my tires kind of like catch in those worn-in divots in the highway, and sometimes it becomes very difficult to make this thing go in a straight line when you're fighting the quality of the road. Now, that doesn't happen as much when I'm using my winter tires, which are smaller, and I'm using them on the factory wheels. You know, it's easier to drive, but if you start doing upgrades, larger tires, you're sometimes going to have annoyances like that. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. But like I said, for me, the Jeep TJ is still a great vehicle because I built it as an off-road vehicle only, but it was capable of driving me to the store. I didn't need it to be super comfortable on the road, on the highway. I mean, I would like it if it was faster, but I don't care because the bulletproof 4-liter engine, I prefer its reliability off-road than its performance on the highway. I care more about being able to make it home than the speed in which I do that. So yeah, for my use case, the TJ, I think, is still probably the perfect vehicle for me. So as I said at the beginning of the video, I do not regret this purchase. I definitely love this vehicle. I've come to live with the quirks and the shortcomings of this vehicle, like I mentioned before, the lack of cargo space. If I was doing like overland camping and I wanted the option of sleeping in the vehicle, you don't really have that. I have slept in this Jeep. It is horrible. I was in the passenger seat trying to sleep. It is possible, it sucks. So if my intention was to do a lot of camping and actually be in the vehicle, then no, this is not the vehicle I really would have chosen. But it still works great for what I want, and that's the ability to get me places in the middle of nowhere, and then of course I could just set up a tent or something like that. So yeah, I would say that overall I don't have any serious problems with how the Jeep has been performing. All of the maintenance and repairs, I'll be honest, it's annoying. Paying for all of these parts, it's annoying. But at the least, I don't have to do I don't have to pay labor. So because these vehicles are so easy to work on, I've never worked on a Jeep before owning this one, and I could still just open the hood and immediately get to work. I didn't have to read a manual or anything like that. It was just so obvious how you do things, for the most part, where I could just hop in there and replace the parts, do the repairs. It wasn't that difficult. So yeah, I think it's going to wrap up this video because I can't really think of anything else I was going to talk about. But yeah, the Jeep TJ is a great vehicle. I really enjoy owning it, but it's not for everyone. So if you're looking for an off-road vehicle that's very capable and you're able to do all of this other work yourself, all that stuff that I mentioned with, doing repairs and upgrades yourself, it's a great vehicle for that. Or if you have more money than brains, then a Jeep is also a good choice for you. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for watching.